from last time. Sorry, there we go. Great, it looks like we have 21 people joining us so far, 22, thank you. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box. I see somebody raised a hand. And if anybody wants to put in the chat box where you're coming from today, we would love to see where all of our participants are tuning in from. Great, so far we have people from Bosnia, from the United States, mostly on the East Coast, Canada. Glad to have you all here with us today. And we'll give people about 1 more minute to get on and we'll get started. Laura, I did not realize you were joining us from Iowa today. That's my home state.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was just there a few weeks ago visiting my grandma. Yeah.
Oh, where in Iowa?
She's in Des Moines. I'm from Mount Pleasant.
Okay, great. I grew up in Indianola, so
nice. Yeah.
I just recently moved back here. Yeah.
Simpson College, right?
Yeah, my dad taught there.
Yes.
Yep.
Small world.
I know. I love that. I always love connecting with a fellow Iowan.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, we will get started here. And I would like to welcome everybody and thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I am Kim Klett, the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights. At EIHR, we cultivate partnerships among educators globally to create materials and deliver training based on best practices in Holocaust education. Together, we deliver content and strategies for teaching mass atrocities history, genocide prevention, and sustainable peace. Today's webinar is one in a series entitled Human Rights Education in Everyday Classrooms, excuse me, Why and How, created by our education coordinator in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Alma Gero. This is the third in a series of 4 programs focusing on human rights education, and we have featured educators from Rwanda, Argentina, Bosnia, and the US. Please watch for notifications of our final webinar on memorializing and the culture of remembrance in human rights education, which will take place in just a few weeks. For today's program, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will ask each presenter to answer them when they are finished. And so right now, Alma, would you go ahead and please introduce our first panelist?
Yes, gladly. Thank you very much, Kim. Welcome to everyone. And our first panelist is Arma Tanovic Brankovic. Arma is a professor of acting at the Academy of Performing Arts in Sarajevo and Vice Dean for Production and Development. She is also the head of the Helen O'Grady Academy in Sarajevo. Arma participated in several international cultural and educative projects. Her main research work includes culture and society, especially theater in the post-conflict period, and collaboration on projects as an international consultant to work towards building capacities of grassroots leaders to use theater-based education for the UN, UNICEF, and Caritas. The floor is yours, Arma.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Alma, and thank you, Kim. And as Alma said, I will talk from theater-based pedagogy about role of art in building a human rights development and society change. So let me start with introduction. Why is it important to teach about human rights? Teaching about human rights and empathy and building trust in individual role of society change is essential to every subject in school. It's necessary also to connect acquisition of knowledge with the application of knowledge in the real world and in particular environment. This is not only work on empathy in children and young people, but also in the same time, it develops a person's self-confidence that she or he must be an active participant in the process of improving the society around him or her. Children and young people, as you probably know, are vulnerable to injustice, social disparities, issues of marginalized groups, minorities, racism, xenophobia. For example, kids in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in similar environments, many of them, and also young people, have felt the brutality of the system and the violation of their basic rights in firsthand or on their own skin. In addition to classroom classes, as we call it here, human rights can be taught through the social block of subjects, for example, history, sociology, social science, or these group of subjects that we usually called under the reduced name as a social science or language or art of language or art or human rights, whatever. Especially language classes, native language, foreign language, literature can be a space which in where human rights are actively can be discussed. I say active because very often the lecture itself does not have a space for identification. So we are going to talk about theater and acting and also applied theater, because acting is very deeply connected with ritual and it's syncretic discipline that is also connected to the deepest human inner beings. Acting engages in very intensely our well-being, our memories, our emotions, our experiences. Acting is also based on a game. So it's a game is in heart of whole children and every human beings. So it's very important to know that theater is not just elitistic art that we consume as entertainment. Theater in social community is a powerful tool that can raise awareness and change attitudes of the individual, but also their complete emotional relationships to particular topic or social anomaly. Acting provides opportunity to live through a stage experience that is strange to us in our lives. Through the scene, we can get to know the whole range of feelings and different perspectives. That is very important to involve acting and theater in teaching about human rights. So there is a different types of applied theater, and in schools and in social communities. The most famous is Adrian Ball Forum Theater, and it's also most popular, but also it's possible to apply collaborative theater, documentary theater, devising theater, and also it's very important to apply drama-based learning with all subjects as well. So how to start? In order to teach about human rights, first of all, we cannot speak about general human rights because it's a very, very, very big topic. I think you need to get the individual and more precisely to the topic that interests you. For example, at the Helen O'Grady Drama Academy, we did 3 different plays. One was about immigrants or children in immigrant camps. The other one was about the racism. We are still in process working on that play. And also we made film about Roma children that is connected with problem of underage marriages in this population. So Kim, I will ask you just to share screen and show the first video about our rehearsal in Helen O'Grady. And I have to mention that was before the pandemic start. So we was in a classroom.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I forgot to optimize for the sound. There we go. And this is the correct one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It rained, it got too muddy for them to play in, so they needed a new astroturf. God, I was so mad. I was so mad. But it's not a money issue. It's a class issue. Please tell me that if that warehouse downtown was filled with little white children, that the school board wouldn't be up in arms clamoring for a change, raising money from somewhere to get these kids a decent classroom. Could you picture rows of little blonde heads in that warehouse playing around in vacant lots? It would not happen. No one clamors for change for little black children.
Where was Maryland? In my graduating class of 150, the number of white males was 5.
Aktivno u nju.
Like me, for whatever reason, were much more numerous. And interracial dating was thrown out on. So it wasn't a big deal when I began dating my friend Edwin at the beginning of my freshman year.
Digni glavu,
I
Ester.
had known him for 2 years and had met his mother twice, both of which times she had been very friendly to me. However, about a week into our relationship, I was sitting in one of my classes when I was called into the house office. To my surprise, I found Edwin's mother.
Digni glavu, Ema.
For me.
Tako, nju zadnju.
About the relationship with our son. Yes, she took a deep breath and told me that she didn't have any problems.
Svi gledamo u Adnu.
Personally, I seemed like a very nice girl, but that she did not like the idea of her son dating a white girl. Then she asked me if I would please break it off with him. I didn't know what to say. I was shocked. Her politeness threw me off. I mumbled a meek, okay, then went directly to the bathroom to cry.
Ustanite. Krenite joj leđa.
You know how hard it is to find friends as soon as you get in high school? I mean, real friends. Not people who are trying to be something they're not. Anyways, I found a real friend. Her name was Nicole, and she was white. Not that that mattered, but it came to the story later. So, Nicole and I became best friends quickly. We just clicked. There was a really good connection. We hung out almost every day after school. We were in a lot of same classes and we were both good in different subjects so we could help each other. Nicole introduced me to a lot of people. She was really friendly and pretty soon I had a group of friends that I really liked.
Okrenite se prema njoj. Okay.
Things were going good. I thought moving to a new area was going to be hard, but Nicole made everything a little bit easier. One day, Nicole had a dinner party at her house. She only invited 6 friends. I was so excited I got dressed up in a new dress. I bought it for the occasion and carpooled to her, drilled all of us. What was our favorite subject? House. 6 of us sat around to the table with her mom and dad. Her mom was nice, but she drilled all of us. What was our favorite subject? What would we do in our free time? How many of us had boyfriends? On and on. She really wanted to make sure that Nicole had good people around her. I had the perfect answer for everything. My favorite subject is English. In my free time, I swim and act. And no, I didn't have a boyfriend because my parents wouldn't approve. For every question, I gave a really innocent girl respond because I really was a really innocent girl. The next day, I called Nicole to go to the movies.
Actually, I can't. I'm doing homework.
Well,
Okrenite se prema njoj, imajte sad scenu. Aha.
that's weird.
Čuvajte telefon u ruci. Čuvajte telefon. Telefon gledate. I called, znači prihvatite telefon i nam.
Ali imate scenu, sad radimo scenu. Leo, dušo, ti ostavi, molim te, telefon. Spusti ga na stolicu. Kako? A tu ti je tekst. Dobro.
Well, that's weird. I thought she said she would be free today. I didn't think much, so I called Andrea instead. Andrea, you want to go to the movies?
I can't. I'm going over to Nicole's house. Aren't you coming?
So Nicole was having people over and she didn't invite me. Her best friend, more than that, she lied to me. She said she was doing homework and I doubt her homework, is having a party. So I called her again. Nicole, you're inviting people over to swim and you didn't tell me.
Oh, how did you find out?
Andrea told me. Why wouldn't you tell me? You don't want me there.
Oh no, it's not that. It's just that.
She paused for a long time. Something was wrong. My tone suddenly softened and I was as sympathetic as possible. What's wrong, Nicole?
Maya, I'm not allowed to hang out with you anymore. My mom told me that I can't hang out with you anymore because you're Indian. I'm sorry, I'm really, really sorry.
I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. I wasn't allowed to hang out with my best friend because I'm Indian. What's wrong with being Indian? What's wrong with me? And just like that, everything went wrong. I lost all of my friends because they all knew Nicole.
Okrenite joj opet leđa.
First, so their loyalness was to her. I was alone, I was confused, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stop crying and all because Nicole's mom didn't like Indians. I wanted to fix the problem, but how can you fix the problem when the problem is your skin?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We can stop here because we have 18 minutes of rehearsal. Thank you very much. It was just a short example of how we choose one topic as a racism, but also we choose a small topic, how kids and youth react when they face a racism in a school. Because the racism is a too large topic to talk the through theater in one play. At the end of this, we will show you the movie. So it's important to choose a very individual topic. with your subject. It's very important to avoid general places because the theater deals with individual stories and not general with topics. So when you choose the topics, you have several approaches how to find or make a text. I will give you 4 examples. First example is to select a play text, some very famous drama or script that deals with topic that you choose. Of course, if you choose this approach, you have to be very informed about plays and dramas and text where you can find this theme or topic. Or also you have to be very connected and informed about copyrights. In our country, if you are using drama scripts for educational purpose, it's free. But I'm not sure how it functions in other environments. That is the first approach. Also, you can ask some people who from your professional theater community, some theater professionals or students to help you with finding material. You can also use a film script and then adapt for theater. This is the first approach. The second one is the adaptation of novel, short story about fairy tale that deals with human rights issues. For example, now we use also the Dear Martin book, which is analyzed as part of English language in all high schools in Bosnia and Herzegovina under the US Embassy project. The third approach is very interesting. You can use editing or collage sample. You can take different texts that talk about particular human rights topic, poetry, novels, quotes, historical date articles from the portal, newspapers, and then you can put all that together and make one play text. The most productive and for me most interesting is documentary work. When you or documentary approach, when you are doing a personal story of the story of someone who survived a human rights violation. So you find someone who survived a kind of violation of human rights, and then you pick up the story. Also in environment and society similar like Bosnia, most of your students, they felt that on their skin. It's very important that any approach you choose is to have children actively involved in text invention. So the movie that we did is based on a real life story from Roma population that we met in our neighborhood, and problem of education of Roma population children, and also problem of underage marriages that kids facing. So Kim, I will ask you again to show the movie orange box.
have the right to education.
You have right for free time and play. You have the right to equality.
Your right for growing up in a family.
You have a right to protection from economic and sexual exploitation.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so this movie is made by kids age from 10 till 15, and they everything they did alone with teacher support, but they did a research job, they done scripts, they done filming, acting, and also editing. And I think that work on this project change something in their own lives, because they start to talk what they have and how they have opportunities, and Roma kids, they don't have the similar opportunities as they have, which is very, very important for them. So once you select a text, you will start with working on that text. And it's a huge space where you can actually actively teach about human rights. Children analyze the text, the circumstances, the historical context. So encourage them with journalistic questions: who, where, when, how, and why. Why is very important question. Why human rights are being violated or threatened? Why does one human being need to oppress another human being? It's a very, very important and root question. So don't deal just with the one construct where there is one oppressor and a victim, except in context such as a genocide or Holocaust, where for ethical reasons, we are not interested in another perspective. However, in very other cases and stories, open a different perspective. It's very, very important to understand why someone wants to oppress another person. This is extremely important, although it can be very painful and potentially develop the conflict. Don't run away from a constructive, creative conflict, and don't underestimate children and youth. Often teachers conduct their conversation with children while remaining with a formal framework. Encourage them to feel safe to say what they think, even if it's an opinion or attitude contrary to yours. So make that work very personal by asking them a bit about their own experiences, have them to write something very personal and biographical about the play, and that can become the part of the play also. If you have a large group in the class, you can divide them. So one group can do the costume, the other set design, the third the script, so you can engage all class. After we finished with work on text, we are going on stage. Let it not be the goal, the making the show, but the process of learning through the play. Before you start the rehearsal process, do the relays, connection, opening exercise. I suggest the book from Adrian Bol, Game for Actors and Non-Actors. You can find, I think it's also on script or on internet. It's very, very good book for all theater beginners. and you can work that exercise with kids, with youth, with students, even with adults. So when setting up and when you're setting up the mise-en-scène rehearsals, start with improvisation. Improvisation must be clearly and well managed and taken very seriously. Theater does not have to provoke Grotowski as great theater director and theorist, and he said that theater needs just one actor and one spectator. Many school projects claim to be similar to professional theater plays. They pretend to rent a hall, make costumes, scenography, and all that is not so important. The context of learning about human rights and the context of the play and story, it's more important than performance. So even more, the more you think about the documentary, about the story and the acting and about idea, it will be easier to reach the audience. When we talk about the audience, make the audience interactive, not just observer. You can introduce some scenes to the audience. So some scenes can be played in audience. You can go out and play scenes outside in your street, in a neighborhood. So you can provocate audience to think about your idea. So break the fourth wall by addressing the scene directly. So think more about how the audience can be interactive. And think about form theater. In form theater, audience is active part of the play, because when you finished one scene, you ask people to give you another end or to potential conflict resolution. So it is very important to involve people in audience to be a part of a play. At the end, I would like to say about theater in the online concept, because we have to talk about circumstances that we are working now. I suppose a lot of schools and a lot of you are working in online with your students. So my school, Helen O'Grady, and also Academy of Performing Arts start 1 month ago. We start online classes, which is extremely hard and very experimental, because theater need a live contact with actor, and audience, with actors. But this digitalization of schooling has led us to the critical thinking strategies of elementary necessity. Theater-based learning, the online concept, has become an interesting conceptual method. So don't underestimate the power of a digital theater, as well as the skills of today's kids. For example, give them the task of making their own film, or for example, or on team Romeo and Juliet. The film you watched, Connect Roma Children, is made by kids who grow up as a zero generation. So they are very, very connected and very good with all programs like iMovie, InShot, and they are learning very fast whole new digital strategies, because it's their world. So
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to give you a time notification that your time
okay,
is
yes, I just want one
Thank
sentence
you.
more, and we will. So hire platforms like Instagram, TikTok, to talk creatively about human rights. These are very powerful networks, and the model of generation attitudes of children. Those networks are modeling the attitude of kids and young people. So we need to use them. So at the end, thank you very much. I will ask Kim just for one one video that we have. It's our online class that we made yesterday about the same topic, about racism, but we just put in digital form.
And I think what I'll do, Arma, is in the interest of time, I'll save that until the end of the program. So I'll let the other people go and then we'll show that.
Okay.
And if we don't have time, then I can send the link to everybody.
Yes. So thank you very much. And I'm here for whole question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Arma, would you please introduce Paul? And then Arma, again, we'll come back to you at the end for when everybody gets to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Arma, for a very stimulating presentation and all of the videos that you presented with your students. I think that the chat box is quite interesting. Feel free to search for some questions. There are some questions for you in the chat box as well, so feel free to check them out. So Paul Lowe is our next presenter. Dr. Paul Lowe is a reader in documentary photography at the London College of Communication at the University of the Arts. Paul is an award-winning photographer, educator, and researcher who has been published in Time, Newsweek, Life, the Sunday Times Magazine, The Observer, and The Independent, among others. He has covered breaking news the world over, including the fall of the Berlin Wall, Nelson Mandela's release, famine in Africa, the conflict here in the former Yugoslavia, and the destruction of Grozny. So I'm really looking forward to Paul's presentation now, and the floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you. Let me just get my share screening going. Okay, so let's see. Just give it a second. Okay, can you see the slide now, hopefully? Great, okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about photography and how you can use photography in a way more than just a descriptive medium that shows you something, how you can use it as a space to think about things. And I think that's the big leap really that I want you to try and do, is think about how photography can be a space of imagination. And it's very difficult when we're working with some of these very difficult themes around genocide and atrocity, because very often some of the images that we see are very graphic and they're very unpleasant, and it's very difficult to use them because they're so repellent. It's hard to work with them. So I'm going to show you instead images that don't necessarily show the actual trauma itself, but instead speak around it. And they're kind of traces of the trauma, if you like. And I'm going to start with four portraits here. And if you look, as you look at these pictures, I think the portrait as a format is a very interesting one, because it invites us to typically try and find some point of connection with the person in the picture. You can go back over them, a point where we can kind of empathize with them, or the sort of the conceit, if you like, of portrait photography is it's telling us something about the character or the personality of the person. And usually that's being done in a way that we're supposed to learn something from that. But when I tell you that this woman is a survivor of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp who was liberated in April 1945, but this woman, the photograph was taken almost at the same time, is one of the camp guards. And this woman is a survivor, and this woman is a camp guard. I think that asks some really interesting questions about the nature of photography and what it is telling us, and what we can learn from somebody's face. So these pictures are part of a series of pictures that were taken by a British Army photographer in August 1945, after these women and men had been arrested and captured as being some of the guards who'd been operating the camp at Belsen. And they were waiting trial in a town called Celle in Germany, waiting for the Lunenburg trials, which is where the Belsen troops, or the Belsen SS guards were tried. And again, I think it's a very, very difficult set of pictures to look at, because these are human beings, they're real people. They're, you know, and the idea is that you're going to kind of empathize with them in some way. But actually, then we also know that they were responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people. But also, you know, the details I think are really fascinating. You know, these women, one of them actually turns out was a hairdresser, and clearly in the camp she'd been doing the hair of her comrades, because it's all quite nicely cut and coiffured and styled and so on. And this very direct sort of view to the camera that they all have, except for one of them who's looking away. So I think, you can begin to see how the face of these people can begin to sort of ask us some of those difficult questions about perpetrators. And we know from the literature and the history and the research that, it's ordinary people that carry out these crimes. And I think that's the really important thing to think about in this context, that most of the time, human rights abuses are done by people like, I'm not going to say like you and me, but they're done by our neighbors. And trying to understand that and how a society can create a situation where people like this can carry out that kind of crime is a very difficult one to deal with. So this is another picture taken from Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. It was taken during the liberation of the camp by the British forces. And the point I want to make about this photograph is this idea of photographs telling stories and being able to work with them and narrate and use them as spaces to interrogate the image and try and find out what's going on in it and ask questions about what's happening, but also to read images as symbolic spaces that stand in for other things. So this is a photograph of Josef Kramer, who was the SS commander of Bergen-Belsen. Previously to that, he'd been one of the senior officers at Auschwitz. And he was arrested by the British forces when the camp was liberated. In fact, he actually signed the camp over to them in a formal process, bizarrely enough. But you can see here, he's an SS officer, but he's dressed in what almost look like prison fatigues. In fact, this is the fatigue uniform of the SS. And I think these two soldiers with him are very military. They're very precise in their bodies. They're very stiff. They're very formal. So for me, these two soldiers on either side of him, they're kind of a visualization of the process of law, the process of being arrested, taken to trial, the process of justice, if you like. And then the background on the right-hand side there, you've got this soldier in the beret with his hands on his hips. He looks slightly overweight. He's wearing glasses. He's the kind of citizen soldier, in my reading of this picture, who has, the school teacher perhaps turned officer, who's leading his men as an honest character, a bit like in Saving Private Ryan, the captain when he turns out to be a school teacher. And then the tiny details of the picture, I think, are really telling. In the background of this was the SS barracks at Bergen-Belsen. And in the background, you can see the lavatory block, which has these little heart-shaped windows in it, like you get in sort of Middle Europa. So the idea that, they made a barrack block that had, somebody had carved a little heart shape in the door of the toilet for ventilation in what was a concentration camp, I also find incredible. So photography is about details as well. It's about these tiny little details. The fact that Kramer's not wearing any shoes, for example, to stop him running away, I guess. So it's about interrogating the image and really looking carefully at the details and thinking about images as symbolic spaces that we can use to think with. This is another picture of Kramer taken a little bit later on. He was described as the Beast of Belsen. And this is a very disturbing image. This is Kramer. It looks like a family portrait. It looks like perhaps a husband and wife, or perhaps a father and a daughter. The kind of picture we're very familiar with as a family portrait. But then obviously the details are strange because this couple are being watched over by a man with a submachine gun. It looks like it's in some kind of kitchen garden, which is also rather strange. It's another one of this series of images that was taken by the British Army photographer in August 1945. And this is actually Kramer with a woman called Irma Gries, who was the female commander of the camp guards at Belsen, and a very notorious, infamous woman who then later on was executed after she was found guilty of war crimes. But again, a very peculiar picture. And I would argue that in this photograph, it sort of challenges our assumptions about a family photograph. And the family photograph is something that's used a lot in Holocaust memorialization. We've seen hundreds of pictures of the families, the Jewish families and other families, Roma, political prisoners and so on, who were exterminated in the Second World War. And the family photograph of them from pre-war is that sort of touchstone of their lives. But I think in this image, it's flipping that. It's challenging our perceptions of what a family portrait should be. It's a kind of slippage, if you like, of the genres. It's a different genre. It's a very chilling image. Oops, sorry. And you can see how at the time in the newspaper reports of these images were used in the press in 1945. You can see here It says, this is from a British newspaper, anyone is guilty. The faces told the story. For all their bestial apathy, for all the unfolding record of their deeds at Belsen, the men and women in the dock at Lunenburg were human, and theirs were human crimes. And so I think, even the media are using this very direct portrait of the face as a way to think about that. So I think it's a really interesting way that you can use photography to ask questions and to make your students think and imagine, and not just as a descriptive medium that just tells you what something looked like at a particular time. So another very strange artifact that came out of that period is an album of photographs taken by a German officer called Karl Hocker. And this emerged in about 5 or 6 years ago when an American Army officer donated it to the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington. He'd found it in 1946 in an apartment in Frankfurt and had kept it secret all that time. And it's the private photography album, the kind of family album, if you like, of Karl Hocker. And Hocker was the adjutant to the commander of Auschwitz. And so he photographed all the people at Auschwitz, the officers, the SS soldiers, and so on. This picture, for example, shows Kramer again, because Kramer was one of the officers who was partly in charge of Auschwitz. It also shows Joseph Mengele on the left-hand side, the notorious Nazi scientist, and also Rudolf Höss, who was the then commander. And you can see it's a very different Kramer here. He's wearing his tailored SS suit, he's smoking a cigar, he's very relaxed. It's a kind of family picture, if you like, a family picture of the Nazi hierarchy. But the album is even more disturbing than that, because most of the pictures were taken at a place called Solothurn, which was a sort of a rest and recuperation camp for the SS officers and the guards, which was located some kilometers away from Auschwitz. It was kind of a holiday camp, if you like, and they celebrated, they sang songs, they played with the accordion, they had this giant sort of group choir singing, singing folk songs and so on. And again, in this picture in the front row there, you can see Kramer and Mengele, along with other members of the Nazi, the SS hierarchy who were in command of the camps. So that's a very peculiar, very strange set of images, which again, I would argue, challenges our preconceptions about what a genre of photography is, the family album. In this case, it's a family album of Nazi killers, and how that then makes us respond to that, and how we can use this to try to understand or make some kind of sense of what happened in these events. Again, this is a photograph which at first glance appears quite horrifying, and we perhaps feel some empathy for this man. He looks like he's a civilian, looks like he's been beaten. But actually, this is one of the SS guards at Dachau, and it was taken by Lee Miller, the American photographer, during the liberation of Dachau. And this is an SS guard who dressed himself in civilian clothes and tried to escape. And during his capture, he'd been recaptured, and he'd been beaten by the American soldiers who'd captured him. And here he's making this very powerful address straight to the camera, looking us straight in the eye. And we have to judge this man. We have to think, what crimes did he commit? Was he guilty? Was he innocent? And again, it's this idea of the photograph making us, asking us questions, not giving us all of the truth, because photographs are not truth, they are interpretations of truth, but it's asking us some difficult questions about how we respond to the person in the photograph. This is a picture, so I'm going to now talk a little bit more about some of the images, more contemporary images. So this is a picture that many of you are probably familiar with. It's Ron Haviv's picture from Bijeljina in April 1992 of the callous execution of a number of the Bosnian Muslim inhabitants of that town by Arkan's tigers when they, inverted commas, liberated it before the war had even really started in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's a very famous picture. It was very widely published at the time. Sadly, it had very little impact at the time. Despite the fact this shows the execution of civilians in the street by very clearly identifiable Serbian paramilitaries, it didn't stop the war. It didn't end the war. It didn't lead to intervention. And the war carried on, as we all know, for many more years afterwards, and many tens of thousands of people were killed. But it's had a life after the war, and Ron is currently making a documentary about all the ways in which this image has been circulated and used since then. It's been used within the tribunals as part of evidence to establish the command responsibility of the Serbian hierarchy over the war. Strangely enough, the people in the picture have not been arrested and tried for their crimes. That's for the slightly counterintuitive thing about the way that images have been used in the ICTY and the tribunals is that very often they're not used in the way you'd expect them to be used, in the sense of saying that man on the left carried out this crime, therefore he should be arrested. They haven't been used in indicting individuals in the pictures, but they've been used as evidence of a pattern of crimes being carried out when the commanders, the senior commanders, have been put on trial. Ironically, the man with his back to the camera, with his nonchalant sunglasses on his head and his cigarette, actually was arrested finally, but he was arrested for drug dealing about 20 years after the war, because he's a sort of turbo folk DJ and drug dealer, petty criminal in Serbia. Another picture by Ron Haviv. So images like that are quite hard to work with, especially with younger students, I would argue, with sort of, teenagers or even younger adults. It's very hard to work with images as graphic as that. So this is another image, which is also taken by Ron Haviv, but it was taken in Kosovo. And this is where I think the images of what's left behind, of the traces, can sometimes be more powerful than the actual thing itself. And that's what I want to talk about now. So this is an image taken in a house in Kosovo after Serbian paramilitaries had executed an elderly man, and then they set the house on fire. His body was then later recovered by the family, but when they lifted his body off the ground of the concrete of their house, it left behind this negative imprint, as it were, of the man's body. This very chilling kind of, almost like a forensic trail around where his body had been. And so it's an image that I think tells us of the horror and the abuse and the atrocity, but it does it in a more subtle way, in a way that we can spend time with this image, horrific as it is. We can use it as a way to think about what happened in this space. And it's very literally a negative imprint of the man himself. So this is a set of pictures by Simon Norfolk, who is a British photographer who returned to Bosnia in 2005 to make a series of images of the landscapes of the suspected mass graves across Bosnia, from things like Srebrenica, as well as all the other graves that were where bodies were hidden, mostly in Republika Srpska. And his idea was to take pictures of the land that was going to give up its secrets, these suspected grave sites that would eventually be exhumed, and eventually the bodies would be recovered. And many of these sites are very ordinary, very banal. This is a picture of a basketball court, which is one of the sites near to Srebrenica where it was suspected there was a secondary mass grave. And I think this is a kind of image that you can work with very powerfully, because it speaks to a very obvious, very sort of, everybody plays basketball. It's quite an anthropomorphic picture in a strange way, the snow, the emotions of it. But also, when we know that this is the site of a mass grave, it adds this whole extra level to the image. Likewise with this, which is a road leading up to one of the mass grave sites, suspected grave sites, very powerful sort of way to deal with the psychological space of what's left, the traces of what's left. And this, in perhaps one of Norfolk's most dramatic images, is the lake near the aluminium smelting plant, where lots of bodies were dumped in the lake, and they probably dissolved horribly enough. But this is the outflow from the factory, which in winter is falling onto the top of the lake, which is frozen, and the waste product from the factory is this blood red color. So it's this kind of like giant blood stain on the landscape where on the site of this mass grave. So I think this is something that I think is a very interesting idea to work with, which is this idea of W.J. Booth's of traces, and then those traces needing someone to find them and to be the witness that brings those traces alive. And I think that's what photography can do very powerfully. It's the idea of the landscape itself almost being an archive that can be read. So this is a series of pictures by Vladimir Miladinovic, a Serbian artist, called Disturbed Soil. And he's worked a lot with archival material from the ICTY on reinterpreting it and re-understanding it and repurposing it. What he did here is he took some forensic images, very small postcard-sized digital images from the archives, and reworked them into giant charcoal drawings, which are 1.5 meters by 2 meters across, installed in the installation in the gallery space. And it's another layer of kind of working with these landscapes. Again, they're suspected grave sites of Kosovan Albanians who were murdered, and then their bodies were reburied in a place called Batanica, which is a suburb of Belgrade. And these are very, very powerful images because they're very, very beautiful, but they're also very, very horrific sites. very, places where bodies were buried. So again, he's playing with this idea of how to translate and transform the landscape and make us think about landscapes as sites where we can try to think about what happened on these places as sites of thinking in. And then lastly, Zia Gafic's project. Zia Gafic is a young Bosnian photographer, and he has very obsessively and carefully documented all of the objects, the personal effects of the Srebrenica victims. So these are all evidence from the exhumed from the mass graves that are being held in the Tuzla Forensic Center, where the bodies are being identified, and photographing them on the stainless steel forensic table. And he's very obsessively photographing every single one of these objects, which is part of the evidence, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and presenting them in this very powerful series of images, which I think we can really relate to because everybody has a key in their pocket. They imagine, these are these testimonies to the lives that were lost. They're very human things. And the idea that they've been preserved, through the incredible journey these objects have taken. And so I'm just going to talk about one more project, which is very similar. This is Fred Ramos. Fred Ramos is a Colombian photographer who's photographed a lot of the legacy of the gang and political violence in Colombia and the disappeared, the human rights abuse of people being murdered and their bodies dumped. And very often the bodies are, they are mutilated to hide their identity and so on. And he was really trying to, he found it impossible to photograph this in a conventional way. It was just too horrific. The bodies that were being exhumed, they were so badly mutilated and so on. So what he did instead is he did these incredible still lives of the clothes of the people. And they are actually part of the process of people trying to identify their loved ones. They will, they created an album with these pictures for people to go and look at to see if they recognize the clothes that their family member was wearing when they were abducted and they were taken away to be murdered. And so really what I think this set of images, they're hauntingly, it's hard to use the word beautiful, but they're very powerfully aesthetic. And I think everybody can relate to a t-shirt, to a pair of jeans. The stories that these clothes tell us, I think, are very powerful. I'm going to just do one, if I've got time, Kim, one last project I want to talk about, which is Shannon Jensen, who is a young American photographer who was photographing in refugees in South Sudan who'd been victims of the oppression there and the atrocities that would force them out of their homes, and they've been walking hundreds of miles to try to get to safety in refugee camps. And she made some pretty conventional story about the long lines of refugees walking through the desert and so on. But people weren't very interested in them, really didn't really get very much attention in the mainstream media. And suddenly she realized that what was really significant was that they'd walk this distance, and the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes became very powerful. So she asked each of them to take their shoes off, and if she could take a picture of their shoes. And she created this sort of grid of images. She photographed about 60 or 70 different pairs altogether. And it's a very, very powerful metaphor because it literally puts you in somebody else's shoes and makes you feel what they must have gone through to go through this incredible journey. And this image, this sort of went viral then when she did publish it. It was very widely published, very widely seen. I can see Kim saying that she's used them in her class. And there's a whole nother talk I could do about the shoe and the metaphor of the shoe. And I'm sure many of you are aware the shoe is something that is used a lot in the Holocaust imagination, if you like, in a lot of the Holocaust museums and so on. So really what I wanted to do today was just give you some examples of how you can use photography as an imaginative space to think with and through and about some of these atrocities, and use it in a way that you can perhaps create entry points into these very difficult subjects that are a bit more accessible than the very difficult images of the actual atrocity or trauma itself. So thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to some questions later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. These are really powerful. I did want to ask one question that came up from Colleen. She was wondering where those first photographs, are they available, the photos of the guards at
Yes,
Belsen?
absolutely. Yes, sorry, yes. So basically the Belsen Guard pictures are available on the Imperial War Museum website. They're part of the archive at the Imperial War Museum. I should have said that, yeah. So the Hoker album is available through the US Holocaust Museum website. and the pictures of the Belsen camp guards are available through the Imperial War Museum online archive, and they are usually free to use for educational purposes. Yeah, and you can find Simon Norfolk's work on his website, and Shannon's on her website as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Alma, would you like to introduce our last panelists?
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. This was really very interesting, and I would say a pretty new topic to us as well, of how to use these photographs that feel a bit too close to home, as we would say, but then again, how we can transform them and use them for this participatory action research approach to learning in our classes. Thank you very much. Our next two presenters are Faith Hillis and Laura Epperson. Faith Hillis is a teaching artist, poet, and performance maker from Houston, Texas. She is the capacity building manager for Arts Connect Houston and currently serves as a lecturer for the University of Texas at Austin, where she teaches storytelling for presentation. Faith received her bachelor's in acting and directing from Sam Houston State University and her master's in drama and theater for youth and communities from the University of Texas at Austin. Laura is a performance maker, teaching artist, and youth worker interested in imagining joyful and just futures through reflective and collaborative artistic processes. Laura's work explores how healing-centered engagement and rigorous aesthetic practice support people in identifying, dismantling, and reimagining unjust systems. I'm very much looking forward to this presentation as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Alma. Just so you know, I'm Laura, and maybe Faith can give a wave. You're muted, Faith.
Hello, everyone. I am Faith. Nice to be with you all today.
Awesome. So while Faith is getting our slides shared, really quick, I just wanted to say for anybody putting in the chat, we're going to have a couple of interactive bits. And so if you can make sure that your chat is set to panelists and attendees, I think it's automatically set to just panelists. So the second option is panelists and attendees. That will make sure that everyone here is able to see what folks are sharing and not just those of us that are panelists. So go ahead and change that if you will. But Faith and I are going to talk for a few minutes and offer a couple of activities for us that come from a project we've been working on for the past almost 2 years now, called the Performing Justice Project. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this project is and some of the theories and frameworks around it. But to start us off, we'd actually love to share with you a piece that was created as a part of the Performing Justice Project. So I think, Faith, you'll click the little icon. Great. So if everyone will just listen to this, and then we'll discuss in a sec.
Race is not the first thing you should see.
Ethnicity is not defined by the color of your skin, but mostly by where you come from.
An ethnic conflict is a conflict between two or more contending ethnic groups. The conflict may be a political, social, economic, or religious fight within society.
Ethnicity is not defined by the color of your skin, but mostly by where you come from.
Because of race, there is systemic discrimination against African Americans people, period.
Ethnicity is heritage and where you come from.
Race is culture.
Race is color.
Ethnicity is where you come from.
Global ethnic wars are not purifying anything. They're tainting humanity.
My race doesn't impact my color or my personality.
Great. So that was an audio piece that was created as a part of a performing justice project that Faith and I directed last year. It was called Our Voice, Imagining a New World. We worked with young folks in Austin, Texas. And so I'm going to invite everyone to just take a second and drop into the chat what's one word or idea that came up for you as you were listening to that audio piece. It could be one word, it could be a phrase, maybe a question. Just drop in the chat what's coming up for you in listening to that piece. identity, culture, especially when one of the voices said race is culture. Race does not define us. Power and change. The word race is meaningless. Diversity, change, labels, sympathy, voice, whose voice, ethnic wars. It's not the color of your skin, a quote from that piece. Awesome. Please continue to pop into the chat things that are coming up for you about this piece. But a lot of the things you all have identified are the same ideas and themes that we really explore in PJP, the Performing Justice Project, when we're working with youth artists. So I'm going to pass it off to Faith to give us a basic idea of what PJP is.
Thank you, Laura. And hello, everyone. Again, thank you, Arma, for that fabulous introduction. My name is Faith. She, her pronouns, and I am currently zooming in from Houston, Texas. I'm so really happy to be in this virtual space with you all. So just a little bit about what is PJP. So the Performing Justice Project was created in 2010 between a partnership or a consultation with some faculty and staff and graduate students at the University of Texas at Austin. Some artists all got together to kind of come up with a program that would incorporate ensemble devised theater that would really explore what is race and what is gender. What is race and gender? We'll talk about a little bit more about why that is the focus of PJP, but some of the original folks who were doing this founding work really discovered that a lot of times when we come into these conversations to talk about equity and to talk about justice, we end up talking a lot about class, which is super important, right? Or we talk about money and how that affects and status. But a lot of times, and probably for the reasons that we've all been socially conditioned, we tend to avoid topics of like race, ethnicity, and gender, because for a lot of us, those can sometimes be harder to tackle with. Maybe we weren't taught that it was okay to have those types of conversations. So what could be a program that uses theater, that uses other forms of art and storytelling and creation that could discuss justice? So PJP, again, uses storytelling, creative writing, physical and embodied imagery to talk about these three things. So to build ensemble and foster alliances, to engage young people in critical social justice issues, and then lastly, to devise original performances that address gender and racial justice. Awesome. So PJP has these three guiding questions that we use to kind of structure and scaffold our exploration with the young people. So the first is, who am I? So thinking about when we begin a process of learning or unpacking or discussing racial and gender justice, how can we first look inward and see, who am I? How do these identities, my identities, how have they impacted me? And how do they change how I move through the world? Secondly, what is injustice and how does it show up in my life? You'll notice that injustice is in parentheses, both to say, how can we describe and unpack what is injustice? And how can we begin to maybe feel what does it mean to be in justice or doing justice-centered work or body-based work, maybe. And then lastly, how do I perform justice, right? So PJP is a performance-making process. The goal is that the young people at the end will have a performance where we can invite various stakeholders in their lives, be it teachers, principals, parents, caseworkers, whomever, who can have a chance just to really sit down and allow the young people to take an hour to take up that space, to speak, to share, to dance, to move. How is that an act of justice? Just by allowing young people the space uninterrupted with adult voices, right? Just to begin to talk about their experiences with race and gender justice. So with that, I'm gonna pass it back to Laura to talk a little bit more about this next part.
Awesome, thanks, Faith. So just as Faith was saying, in PJP, we're working with young people as well as community stakeholders. PJP happens in schools, in juvenile detention centers, and foster care facilities, oftentimes in places where young people don't have a choice about where they are, is one of the ways we describe where PJP tends to happen. And wherever we are, we bring these core values and beliefs and practices with us. And so I'm just going to go over the values, but invite you all to please read and take in the beliefs and practices that underpin these main values of PJP. So our first value is collaboration. We think about that not only in terms of our collaboration with the young people, but also our collaboration with each other and with other community partners. Hard work and serious play. As Faith was mentioning, joy and dance and laughter is a really important part of the work we do because we recognize how hard and urgent the work is. And without moments of joy and play, we don't know that the work will be able to happen. We also value the experience and wisdom of young people. Just as Faith was saying, we really see youth performance as an act of justice itself. And so centering young people, giving them that space, amplifying their stories and voices is really integral to PJP. We also value opportunities for belonging and recognizing that those have to be built. Those can't be assumed. We can't say just because we're in a room together, we all belong here or we all feel belonging. And so we find opportunities for growth and learning within the pursuit of belonging for all of us. And then finally, obviously, we value gender and racial justice. Faith and I like to say that everything is PJP because, as Faith was saying earlier, gender and racial justice really underpins so much of our interactions, especially here in the United States, where Faith and I are both based, and are at the root of any pursuit of shared liberation that we all want to work towards. So one of the ways that we use all of these values in PJP is through what we call performance actions. And we're going to engage in a performance action in just a moment. But a performance action is a theater strategy that is facilitated specifically through the lens of performing gender and racial justice. So a lot of the stuff we do is actually super in line with some of the things that Arma was talking about before. We use a lot of strategies that come from Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed work. But what makes them into performance actions as opposed to theater strategies is that everything we're doing, every discussion, every embodiment, every scene that we create is through this lens of gender or injustice. So with these performance actions, we invite young people to name who they are, to explore constructs of gender, race, and power, and to create justice-oriented performance. So I'm going to pass over to Faith to jump us into a short performance action that we're going to do together. And then at the end, we're going to offer some resources with a few more performance actions and ways that you all, if you're interested in bringing PJP into your own spaces, can continue to do that.
Awesome. So the first performance action, or the one performance action that we're all going to move through together today, is 6-word stories. 6-word stories is a performance action that is inspired by the work of a person named Michelle Norris and the Race Card Project. So we're going to use some work that was inspired and created by Michelle Norris to really begin the process of reflecting on race and gender and identity. So 6-word stories. So here are some examples from 6-word stories that have been created both through the Race Card Project and through PJP sessions that Laura and I facilitated. So the first 6-word story is 3 cultures, 2 races, no home. Native American, we are still here. I don't see color, stop lying. Look 21, but 17. Awesome. So these are 4 6-word stories. The last 2 were created by young people, again, really thinking about their experiences with race and gender, and really taking a story and a moment and kind of codifying it down to just 6 words that can describe that feeling or that moment in time for them. So we're all going to do some of that work together today. So I'm going to pass it back to Laura to kind of set us up with some prompts that you all will be reflecting on in order to create your 6-word stories.
Yeah, so before we jump right into creating our 6-word stories, and maybe some people already have one, which is awesome, and I encourage you to jot it down, but it's helpful to do a little reflection, a little pre-thinking to get us there. So I'm going to invite you to just take, and we don't have a ton of time, so we'll probably only take about 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, to just do some reflecting. Maybe free write reflection is helpful for you. You could be typing or writing longhand. Maybe you just want to think about something. I know sometimes doodling can be a helpful way to reflect. So however is most helpful for you to reflect, I invite you to reflect on 1 or 2 of these questions. So the first, really looking at race and ethnicity, you might think about, when was the first time you remember when someone or something made you aware of your race, ethnicity, or color of your skin? What happened? How did you respond? And how did you feel? Or you could focus on gender and think about, when was a moment when you were treated differently because of your gender, or a moment that shaped your understanding of gender? What happened? How did you respond? And how did you feel? So we'll take a few minutes to just reflect on these moments for ourselves, and then we'll come back and craft our 6-word stories. All right, and we'll take maybe about 30 more seconds to reflect here.
Awesome. Okay, if you're still thinking about those stories, feel free to do so. I'm just going to give us the next kind of set of directions. So once you have that story, or if you have multiple stories, go ahead and select one. Select a thought, a moment, a story, or a question, and begin to see how you can craft that into 6 words. I already see a 6-word story in the chat, which is awesome. So as you are developing them, feel free to begin to drop them. But these 6-word stories do not need to be in complete sentences. They really don't need to make sense or feel coherent to anyone but you. But just how can you capture the essence of that story, right? And this story could be from a moment that made you feel happy, made you feel joyful. It could be from a moment that was tougher for you to move through. Whatever it is, see how you can capture that into 6 words. And then as you've done that, go ahead and begin to drop them into the chat. There are already some amazing 6-word stories in the chat. So as you're working, take some time to read what you see coming up in the chat. And then in just a moment, I'm going to read just a few of them out loud. That way we can put them into the space. Awesome. Thank you all for being brave and being bold and being willing to share these stories and these experiences. So I'm going to begin to read just a few of them out loud. But as you're listening or reading other stories, begin to think for yourself, what connections are you making maybe between what you wrote and what someone else wrote? How is this unpacking or having us to think about these questions around race and gender? And Laura, if you also see any and you want to shout some out, please feel free to do so. But I see, but will they look like me? Body shaming, you're ugly, you can't be with us. Women's work, we do it all. Leave, you're wrong, name not right. Women supporting women, power is endless. You can't play, you're a girl. Two ethnicities, same gender, one love.
I'll call it a few, Faith.
Thank you.
Men can be hurt sometimes too. Sense is what makes us cowards. Why is he better than me? Women can't drive, can't hear. Driving. Awesome.
Thank you all for sharing those 6-word stories. If you haven't shared, or if there are other ones coming to you, feel free to keep dropping them into the chat. So we just want to say that this is a moment, this is one performance action, right? And if we were doing a full PJP process, the next step might be to take those stories and figure out how we can put them into our bodies. Maybe we create a gesture that goes along with it, or a short dance or movement sequence, right? How can we take this text, right? So we're already devising and creating a performance just with these 6 words, stories. Could we put them all together and have us standing in different places on the stage and then we perform them, right? So thinking about this process of unpacking who we are and who am I under this lens of racial and gender justice is already providing us with material to push us into performance. So the next step would be then to just embody it. We also want to know that there is some like ensemble accountability that has to take place when we're in multiracial, multi-ethnic, multiple gender spaces, right? So sometimes there are moments when someone's 6-word stories might tug at someone else and maybe feel uncomfortable, or like, I don't know, that doesn't sit right with my stomach, right? Or just some tension comes up when we're sharing our experiences. So how, as facilitators, do we both hold where everyone is in the work and then encourage people, well, thank you for sharing that experience, and let's look at it from this angle, right? How can we hold that because of our varying identities, we all have different ways of entering into the space and thinking about the work? So as facilitators, how can we hold that? So lastly, just this 6-word stories, right, helps us to examine this question of who am I? So beginning to explore our identity and our experiences. And then during this process is when we would begin to address terms that maybe come up. We're like, I'm not really sure what the difference is between race and ethnicity, or I'm not sure what this term means, right? How can we use these both as spaces for us to engage in performance and do some learning and unlearning collectively as a group?
Awesome. So to close out, we would just like to share a few resources with you all. So 6-word stories is a performance action that, as you can see, could fit into a lot of different spaces. It can also obviously be adapted to explore other human rights issues. And we wanted to share a full lesson plan with you as well, that I'm dropping into the chat here, the link, as well as there's a link here on the slide. And then we have lesson slides that go along with that same lesson. So I'm putting those into the chat. And then finally, we also have an exploration path for what a performing justice project might look like over a 10-week period, how you might split up exploring the different eyes or the different ideas, excuse me, throughout that process. I'll also say all of these lessons that Faith and I are sharing, they were from a performing justice project we did last fall. So they are geared towards in-person exploration and learning. However, Faith and I have begun to do some PJP work in the virtual digital space. space. So if that is where you are and you're really excited about thinking about what does embodied justice look like online, we would love to talk to you about that. We're going to share our emails here in a second. And so please reach out. We've got some other lessons and some resources we could share if that's where you are. And also would love to talk about how to adapt these lesson plans that we are sharing into this virtual space.
Lastly, our email addresses are on the screen. Feel free to message us separately or drop questions in chat. But there is a book out, Devising Critically Engaged Theater with Youth, the Performing Justice Project, that was written by Megan Allred and Lynn Hoare, two of the people who founded PJP. Laura and I have an essay in there where we're talking about our PJP work. So that book is out there and available. There is a discount code that you can use that I believe gives you 20% off that Laura has dropped in the chat. So if you're looking for a full resource that talks about PJP and that process, please check out that book. And you can also go to the Performing Justice Project website for more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What a rich presentation and so many resources. As so many of us are teachers, that is excellent to have. We wanted to end with time for a few of the questions that we've seen in the chat box. And I wanted to go back to one that Matthew just asked. And it goes back to Arma asking you a question about how much context is taught and how much is student research when creating theater pieces?
Pardon? Sorry, I didn't hear. Can you just repeat?
Yeah, of course. How much context is taught and how much is student research when you're creating your theater pieces?
Okay, thank you. Great question. Of course, the basic work is student research. So as I said, it can be a different approach. And we also see in the last presentation, amazing approach by two authors. But also I prefer to give the students opportunity to talk with people that they share the stories with them, and then we will stories put in a theater. So this is my approach. I like real life stories. And also I would like to see how students can connect their own stories and inner beings and inner attitude with the stories that they heard and put on stage.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention too, there were so many comments, Arma, when you were speaking about how your students' English skills are just amazing. And I had forgotten that they were not native speakers until I heard you speaking in Bosnian in the background. And I was like, wait, who's that? You know, and it was just great.
Yes. Actually, thank you very much. Some of them are with us here and they're writing on chat and they're making questions. And I'm very happy because they see the last presentation and also photos by Paul presentation. And I have to say that they are better English speakers than me. I'm acting teacher, but we also have a different teacher who are working on language skills with them. So in same time, we are practicing language and also we are teaching and learning about human rights.
And I just saw the comment from Nada. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, but thank you for joining us and the other students as well. Esther, it looks like, and Asya, thank you so much for being with us. Your work was amazing. Yes, Colleen is chiming in as well. Great work. Any other questions for any of our panelists? Alma, did you notice any that I missed along the way?
There was one question for Paul about the guards and where teachers could find some of the photographs to use in their classes. Specifically.
Yeah, as I said, yeah, that was the Imperial War Museum archive. They're all taken by a British Army photographer in Celle in August 1945. So if you search the archive for Belsen guards, something like that, you probably find it. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
thank you
both the
very
Imperial
much.
War Museum and the United States Holocaust Museum have very good photographic archives that are available and you can use for teaching materials and so on. They have a couple of good guides on using photographs as well in classrooms and so on.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. Another question for you was related to the fact that I can't find the question now, but I did write it down because many of our attendees were writing questions in the chat box instead of the Q&A. Maybe it's our fault as well because we said keep writing in the chat box.
Yeah, I was
So
trying to
what's the
follow it as well, but
question?
there's so much to know. Yes, go on.
Yeah, but I'm really glad there's so many comments and our attendees are so interested in the topics. I'm really glad about that. So one of the questions was related to some of the more disturbing photographs and how what kind of photographs would be suitable to use in class. And I'm not really quite sure, I can't find a comment anymore, but what to do with the more disturbing photographs because we were talking about showing the truth.
Yeah, it's very difficult, I think, if you're working with people under 18, certainly. I think if it's university students, I mean, obviously, you know, I teach at university and I would use those more graphic images, but I would always use a warning in advance anyway. And I would say some of the images today may be graphic and I would typically not linger on them for too long. I would, you know, I try and put them, you know, not show them for too long. And that's why I feel like these images of the traces and the spaces, the landscapes, the objects, are actually, I think they can speak in a very powerful human way. And I think in some ways they're actually more powerful because I think the danger with, I mean, you know, the problem with a lot of pictures of the actual thing itself is it's even when we see photographs of the effect of violence, it's often kind of sanitized even in that sense. And it's quite hard to work with it, you know, in a way that really shows how horrible it is if somebody's blown up by a cluster bomb, for example. I mean, it's, you know, it's like pieces of meat in the butchers and you can't even look at it, you know, in any context. So these sorts of images, I think, that are a little bit more subtle, they are of the things and the places. I think that, as I said earlier on, it's really about trying to get people to engage their imagination and to kind of project backwards. I mean, photographs represent the past into the present and they allow us to think. I think it was interesting that Alan was saying earlier on about the specific and the generic. I think all the photographs I showed today are of very specific events, locations, places that are located in a specific moment in time, but they also speak to more general themes around, you know, violence, around refugees, around atrocity, and so on. And I think that's one of the keys to how the photograph operates. It's a very specific thing, but it's also a very general one, and you can play with that. You can use that gap, if you like, between those two. It kind of resonates or oscillates between those two different registers. And I think that's a way to kind of make photographs very useful, because I think for example, I did quite a lot of work with PCRC, the Post-Conflict Research Center here in Bosnia, and they did a portrait series called Rescuers, which was portraits of people that had rescued people from genocide. And it was from Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, and from the Holocaust. And when they were working with youth in Bosnia, they started off by showing them the pictures of the Rwandan rescuers and the Cambodians, and got them to talk about what it might be to rescue a neighbor, to show moral courage in a situation. And then they came to the pictures from Bosnia. So by the time they got to talking about Bosnia, they'd already established that, you know, the general principle that being an active bystander or taking action is a good thing to do. And then it kind of then switched to the local context. So I think, you know, you can use photographs of one issue, one place, one location to talk about another one in a very interesting way. So I think that's why, for example, the pictures of the Serbian, of the German SS guards, you know, by talking about them as perpetrators, you can then talk about more contemporary conflicts as well, and about, you know, how can it be that somebody who's your neighbor, you know, carry out that kind of atrocity against you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And there were so many comments about how useful your presentation on how to use photography and conflict-related photography in class. Thank you so much. Laura and Faith, when it comes to your, are there any questions for Laura and Faith when it comes to their presentation? Because you had a bit of a more interactive presentation in the sense of speaking directly to us and having attendees write in the chat box. But if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. I would like to specifically ask, if that's okay, when it comes to youth projects and projects that involve young people specifically, how much do you feel are young people truly involved in the communities where you live or where you used to work or where you currently work? Because some of the comments here, I commented it, and some other participants commented as well, that we don't really have that many initiatives of how to involve young people in justice and gender issues and other related projects. So what are your experiences?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the benefit of PJP is that youth are the center of our work. And so we can't do PJP if we're not collaborating with youth artists. And part of that came from Faith and I working in theater, but specifically studying theater with young people. So I would say it still feels like a space where there needs to be more. We definitely, PJP is not the only group out there doing this kind of work, not even the only folks working around gender and racial justice through the arts, but also there's not a deluge of those organizations either, at least not that I know of. So, and I think from the spaces that I've done this work in, it always feels like in those spaces, this is very welcome and needed and something that isn't happening. Again, we often work with folks that don't identify as theater artists, maybe young people that have never been in a play before, maybe have never, a lot of the stuff we talked about with some of the young people we worked with last fall was that no adult had ever asked them about justice before, had ever asked them about race or gender. They didn't seem to care, and they were kind of at first surprised about why we were there. Yeah, Faith, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, just to echo everything that Laura has said, I think something that has been both like energizing for me is just in any and all of these spaces, the young people have been really ready to have these conversations, willing to ask tough questions, willing to like not know and like figure out together and like sit in ambiguity and do some things that honestly as adults, I feel like sometimes we have harder times to do because we have titles behind our names and all these things. And it's hard to just say, I don't know, or I didn't know that. And so it's been really encouraging because I think we all can say and know is that young people have thoughts and opinions, whether they're expressing it on TikTok or social media or amongst each other and with their friends, right? Young people are finding ways to be activists and engage in social justice work in all kinds of ways, even if it looks different than maybe what we're familiar with as like justice work. So it's been exciting to find those places and spaces, and then just knowing that sometimes those places and spaces are difficult because of rules and laws and systems and things that make the work hard. I think, which is why, as Laura said earlier, trying to find the joy in that, because there can be tensions from all angles, but ultimately it has proved to be very just beautiful and ultimately like worth it, I think, for our like ultimate goal, like big picture of creating a society where we don't have to struggle with these things in the future.
Thank you.
I would like to thank our panelists today. This was wonderful. Again, such a great wealth of resources for those of us who are in the classroom. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all the participants for joining us. I know in the US it's a holiday weekend and that's hard sometimes, but we made it. So thank you very much for attending. And we'll see you all next time.
Bye, thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks, and thanks to you for hosting it, Kim and Alma. Well done. Great moderation there as well. Well done. And thanks to all the participants and the attendees. Bye.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to talk and to share experience with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.